Hi everyone and welcome to Developer 3.5 Pro YouTube channel. So in the previous video I made a game in 15 minutes, but I wanted to make another one in 10 minutes. So in this video I'm gonna do that. The idea of this game is to use the arrow keys to move left and right, and you have to avoid the red spheres. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. As you can see, I've already created an empty project. So I'm gonna start by creating a cube. Then I'm gonna scale it along the x-axis and the z-axis. Then I'm gonna rotate the main camera around the x-axis, and I'm gonna move it a little bit so that we can see the cube much better. Then I'm gonna change the clear flags to a solid color, and I'm gonna change the background color to a blue one. After that, let's create a new folder. I'm gonna call this folder materials. So inside this folder, let's start by creating the first material, and let's call this ground. So I'm gonna give it a darker green color. Then let's apply this to our cube. After that, let's create another cube. This is going to be our player. So let's rename this to player. After that, let's go ahead and create a new folder under the assets folder, and let's call this scripts. Inside this folder, let's start by creating the first one using create C# script. Let's call this player. We are going to use the script to move the player left and right. Then let's open it up in Visual Studio. Inside the script, we're gonna start by creating a reference for the character controller component, because we are going to use the character controller component to move the player using public character controller. Let's call it controller. Also, we're gonna need a speed variable, and it's going to be float, and I'm gonna give it a 10 by default. Then under the update method, we are going to take the horizontal input from the left and right arrow keys using input dot get axis, and the axis is called horizontal for the left and right arrow keys. Then we're gonna move the player using controller dot move. So this method, we are going to give it a direction. So we are going to use a new vector 3. We're gonna move it along the x-axis using the horizontal input multiplied by the speed by the time to delta time. But for the x, for the y and the z, we are going to leave it as 0. So we'll be able to move only left and right. Then let's save this and go back into Unity. Let's select the player and attach the script to our player cube. Then, as you can see, we need to add the character controller component, and let's assign this to our controller variable. Now, if we hit play, as you can see, I can move left and right using the arrow keys, but as you can see, I can go outside of the cube. That's why I'm gonna create 2 more cubes on each side. So let's start by creating the first one on the right side so that we can't go outside of this cube. I'm gonna scale it by 2 as well, and let's duplicate this and move it to the other side. I'm gonna apply the same material, which is the green one, to our cubes. Also, I'm gonna create another material for the player. Let's call it player as well. So we're gonna give it a yellow color. You can use any color you want. Then let's assign this material to our player. If we hit play again, as you can see, I can move left and right, but I can't go outside of this area. Now, we're gonna start by creating the enemy, which is going to be a sphere. So let's move it by 8 along the y-axis. So we're gonna rename this to enemy. And also, we are going to create a new material for it. So let's create another material. I'm gonna call it enemy as well. And let's give it a red color. Then let's assign this material to our enemy. Also, I'm gonna add a rigid body component so that it's going to be affected by gravity. Let's check its trigger. Then let's hit play again. As you can see, we have our enemy falls down. But I wanted to add an enemy spawner to spawn enemies each second, for example. That's why let's make a prefab out of this enemy. Then let's delete it. And let's create an empty game object. I'm gonna call it enemy spawner, which is going to be responsible for spawning the enemies. I'm gonna move it by 8 along the y-axis. So we're gonna use the transform.position for the enemy position, and we are going to add a random value along the x-axis. As you can see here, we are going to use a random value between -6 and 6, as you can see right now. So let's delete this and let's create another script under the scripts folder. I'm gonna call this enemy spawner as well. Then let's open it up in Visual Studio. Inside the script, let's start by adding the reference for our enemy using public game object, and let's call this enemy. We are going to assign this from the inspector. Then we're gonna need a spawn rate, and it's going to be a float, and let's call this spawn rate. For example, we want to spawn 2 enemies each second. You can change this. Then let's create a timer, and it's going to be a private float timer. We're gonna give it a value by default 0. Then under the update method, we are going to add to the timer the time.delta time, so that we can count the time. After that, we are going to check if the timer is greater than 1 divided by the spawn rate. In this case, we are going to spawn a new enemy. But before that, we need to reset the timer using timer equals 0. After that, we are going to use the instantiate method. So I'm gonna give it the enemy object. Then we're gonna use the transform.position, the enemy spawner position, and we are going to add the transform.right multiplied by a random number using random.range, and we are going to use a random number between -6 and 6. And finally, for the rotation, we are going to use quaternion.identity, using quaternion.identity. Now let's save this and go back into Unity. Let's select the enemy spawner, empty game object, and let's attach the script. We're gonna drag in the enemy object. Now if we hit play, as you can see, we have enemy spawned. We are spawning 2 enemies each second. But as you can see, nothing happened when the enemy trigger the player. That's why we are going to add the enemy script to check if it triggers the player using right click, create C# script, and let's call this enemy. Then let's open it up in Visual Studio. So inside the script, we are going to remove the start and the update methods. We don't need these, but we're gonna need the method onTriggerEnter. So this is going to be called when the sphere triggers something. Then we are going to check if it's the player using ifOther.tag equals the player. In this case, we have a game over. So I'm gonna reload the level. That's why first we need to use the namespace Unity Engine .scene management. Then over here, let's use scene manager .load scene, so that we can load the scene, and the scene is with the index 0 because we have just one scene. Now let's select the player, and we're gonna change the tag to player tag. After that, let's open the enemy prefab. Then we're gonna attach the enemy script to our enemy, and over here we have the script. Now we need to make sure to go under the build settings and add the scene with the index 0 so that we can load it. Now if we hit play, as you can see, I can go right and left, but when the sphere trigger the player, the level is loaded. Now I'm gonna add a main theme to our game, and let's drag in this theme. Then I'm gonna attach it to our main camera. So we have here the audio source. Let's check the loop. Then we have a game. As you can see, I can go right and left and avoid the sphere. And when the sphere trigger the player, the level is loaded again. And you can play the game over and over again. So I hope you enjoyed this video. on how to make this game in 10 minutes. Also, I'm gonna show you that you can increase the difficulty of the game. You can increase the spawn rate. For example, let's change it to 4. Now if we hit play again, we have 4 enemies spawned each second, and the game is more difficult to play. So that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to make a game in 10 minutes. So if you have any question or comment, make sure to write it under the comment section down below. Make sure to subscribe and like the video if you like it, and have a great day.